1987, the retail world was facing intense challenges. Two giants in their industries, Walmart and Procter and Gamble, were locked in an adversarial relationship. They were competitors rather than allies, and conflicts threatened to slow the growth of both. That year, Tom Muccio and his team challenged the status quo. Under his leadership, the team moved to Bentonville, Arkansas, the headquarters of Walmart, with a clear purpose: to build trust and change how the two companies worked together. Tom and his team started by identifying the key problems: lack of trust, opposing visions, and a relationship based on conflict rather than collaboration. But instead of giving up, Muccio and his team devised a revolutionary plan. First, he built strong relationships based on trust, living Walmart's culture up close and establishing a genuine connection with its leaders. Second, he promoted long-term joint planning. Walmart and P&G stopped focusing on one-off transactions and started thinking like strategic partners with a shared vision. And third, they changed the negotiating mindset. Instead of debating prices and margins, they introduced a collaborative approach focused on solving problems together. This change transformed the relationship between Walmart and P&G, marking a before and after in global retailing. Thanks to Tom's vision, strategic collaboration replaced conflict, driving unprecedented growth for both companies. Today, the model implemented by Tom Muccio is studied in business schools and recognized as one of the most successful partnerships in history. The story of this revolution is captured in his book Collaborative Disruption, a legacy of leadership and collaboration that continues to inspire the business world. Meet the man behind Collaborative Disruption. Welcome to Tom Muccio's Talk.
First of all, that's way overhyped. There's hundreds of people's fingerprints on these results, so please understand that. The other thing, I need to apologize. I can't speak Spanish, so I feel a little bit like I've got an audience that's a tuxedo and I'm a pair of brown shoes.
Well, first of all, thank you, Tom, for flying all the way from Bentonville, Arkansas, which you have called the Silicon Valley of retail,
right,
to Santiago de Chile, which I can state is the Silicon Valley of retail in South America. So we have an audience here of experts in retail, CPG brands, and I think it's a perfect audience to hear your story of how you transformed the relationship between CPG brands and retail. And everything is here. I highly encourage you to read this book. But what we're going to do with this 35 minutes of our conversation and then 10, 15 minutes of your questions is to go through the story of Tom and how Tom and his team with Walmart and the team that Walmart put together really disrupted the relationship between the retailer and the supplier, starting with the language. And let's start by going back to 1987. So that's 37 years ago. Tell us about P&G, the company where you worked, and Walmart's relationship back then. And at that time, the way Lou Pritchett, which was P&G's VP of sales, described that both companies were focused on the customer, but each one did it independently of each other. So how was Walmart, how was P&G back in 1987?
Well, through the course of a discussion, I'm going to identify some dragons that exist in every company. You know, in the medieval, when they show the movies, if you want to marry the princess, you got to kill the dragon. So there's a lot of dragons, and so I will be describing dragons as we go through, and you can identify them in your companies.
And lately, we'll talk about the concept of dragons and how you
But P&G
at
the time was the world's largest, most successful consumer products company. We did three things extremely well. We had consumer research to identify what consumers wanted. We were able to build products that met or exceeded their expectations, and we were the largest spender of advertising. We did soap operas, sampling to create demand. But then there was a gap between what we did well and retailers. We viewed retailers as a necessary evil, kind of a pickup point for our products. We didn't think they added any value. And one of the dragons that you have to kill is success blindness, and P&G had it big time. We thought because everything we did worked out, if we just kept doing what we always did, it would all work out. And then what that does is it starts you get pride, you get a little bit of arrogance, and you don't listen and you don't see what's going on. Lou Pritchett had been our vice president or our president of in one of our international markets, and he came back in the Philippines, and he came back and he said, wait a minute, look at all the things that are changing. Maybe we should be looking at going to market differently. And he said, well, as an example, who's this Walmart? They're our number 4 customer. They're 3% of our business. Who are they? Well, at the time, P&G was organized in 8 product divisions. Each division was autonomous. All the invoice said Procter & Gamble, but our policies were different. One of my colleagues actually said P&G could have been a Mercedes, but instead we settled for 8 bicycles. So that was very complex for our retail partners because they were like dealing with 8 different companies instead of one. So that was P&G at that time. Walmart, meanwhile, in P&G, we managed our business not by customer, but by market. So we could tell you what was going on in Atlanta, what was going on in Dallas or New York, but customers were they were kind of in those markets, but that wasn't the important driver. Walmart, meanwhile, was this fast-growing company. We were 3.5% of their business, but they were in Bentonville, Arkansas, and so nobody really knew a lot about what was going on, except for Sam Walton knew that he had this new model called everyday low pricing, which was totally different than the rest of the market, and nobody wanted to do it. The other retailers thought it was stupid, and it just was going to make all of the CPG companies have to make all these changes. So they were kind of a nuisance. They were constantly wanting things that we didn't think they needed. And so what Lou Pritchett decided to do is he got a multifunctional team, which I led, and he said, I want you to go away and do a recommendation of how we should go to market in the year 2000.
But let me stop you right there.
Okay.
Because before they decided that, they got together in 1987 again, and they asked themselves what-if questions. So what if the 2 companies open up their lids or their hoods and let the others see inside, which was, I think, that was not the case at that time. What if they shared relevant information, which might seem very obvious right now, but not 30 years ago? What if they coordinated on processes, information technology, and marketing? And Sam Walton at the end asked, what if they acted as one company? And that's where their big decision came, and that's where they called you.
Well, yeah, Sam said, if you think of my stores as an extension of your company, we will do business entirely differently than we're doing today. And that made so much sense. That's why we called it, we're going to operate mentally like we're one company. What would we do differently? What are the pain points? What are the things that we don't understand about each other? What are the things that are opportunities that are being missed in the system? It was a brilliant insight that he had, and that was really ended up being the mantra that we followed to tackle every issue that we came across.
So in this case, commitment came from the top of the organization, and it never wavered. It was always like that.
No, it was not easy to get that because P&G didn't want to change.
Mm-hmm.
P&G didn't want to change at the top.
Arrogance, complacency.
Yeah, and if there was a good idea, we would give it to you. And Walmart said P&G will never change. So Walmart didn't want to invest the time because they didn't think we would change. P&G didn't want to change. And Sam said, it's got to change or it won't work. So it's an interesting story. He used to say, if I want to punish my people, I put them on the P&G business. But at one point he said, listen, I am so desperate to get P&G to change, because if they change, the other CPG companies will follow. So he said, does anybody have anything that P&G has done well? So one of the buyers had something that we did. So he said, okay, I'm going to make them Supplier of the Year, which was a big deal at Walmart, Vendor of the Year. And so he called our CEO, John Smale at the time, and to give him this news. The assistant wouldn't put him through because our CEO didn't talk with customers and she didn't know who Sam Walton was. So we transferred him all around trying to get, and he just got frustrated and gave the award to somebody else. But following on, this guy, Lou Pritchett, ended up, he was a Eagle Scout, and so was Sam Walton. And they had a mutual friend. And he said to the mutual friend, can you get me an appointment with Sam Walton? He said, no, you don't want an appointment with Sam. He's not an office kind of guy. But I will, every year we do what's called a float trip down a river with our wives. I'll get you invited to the float trip. And so that's how it started. And Sam expressed his frustration. And typically in P&G, Lou said, I've got the solution. You bring your leadership team to Cincinnati, and we have a special course on total quality that Dr. Deming invented for P&G, and that was big in those days. Well, Walmart was not the kind of company that met for 3 days in a conference room, but Sam was so desperate, he did it. At the end of the 3 days, he stood up and said to our CEO, let's do it. And our CEO said, let's do what? Let's do this total quality thing between our two companies. Our CEO, because remember, we're operated as 8 different divisions. Our CEO looked at him, said, I'll get back to you. Then, after Sam and his team left, our senior executive group got together, and our CEO said, we've got to do something different. We invited him up here. We can't just not do something. So somebody says, what can we do? Well, this little team that I had, they put the recommendation together how to go to market in 2000. We thought it was a great recommendation, but the senior executives said, thank you for playing. Make a copy. We'll stick it in a file. Well, that was the only thing that we had that was different, was this team. And so some of the senior executives said, okay, we'll test it for a year. It won't work, but we'll get credit for having tried something new. So that's how then that came out of the vault. And they said, okay, you and your merry team are headed to Bentonville, because that was one of our recommendations. We said we need to go to market multifunctional. We need to be co-located. We need to have a relationship that is co-designed by the two teams so that we have common strategies and common objectives. And the objectives had to play in both companies. So we said it was a one-company operating model. Clearly, we're 2 companies, and you're trying to enroll 2 separate companies at the same time. And so our initial objectives were both wanted to increase sales, increase profit. We wanted to eliminate non-value-added cost. We wanted to increase market share, and we wanted to develop our people. We could all agree on that. And so that became the starting point. And we had a mission that we co-developed, and that mission was to achieve the long-term business objectives of the 2 companies with the viewpoint that we had a common customer. okay? And this was a big revelation to P&G because we were all focused on the consumer, the person who used the product. Walmart was much more focused on the shopper, the person that was buying the product. And it wasn't until we kept talking with each other that we realized it was the same person. They just wore two hats. But once we agreed, we have a common customer here. Now, what can we do that improve the lives and the experience of this common customer in a way that both of us win? And so we said, we're going to do, the relationship's going to be based on a win-win overall. And every project will either be win-win, we'll look for win-win or win-neutral. There are things that I might be able to do at Procter & Gamble that helps Walmart, didn't cost me, or vice versa. But we would never work on win-lose projects. But we would always, when we got a project that it was win-lose, we would say, how can we turn this from win-lose into at least win-neutral? And it's a
Tom,
simple.
let me interrupt you
Okay.
and take a quick step back, because in order to do that, you had to build, I think the main element, and when you talk about in your book, is trust.
Right.
So 37 years ago, almost to the date, January 10th, 1989, you were appointed as Director of Customer Business Development.
Right.
And you took your bags and you asked your wife, and you moved from Cincinnati headquarters to small Bentonville, Arkansas.
That's correct.
And you had to set shop in Bentonville, open an office, and start figuring out what to do.
Right.
Because you've already started talking about what you did, but you had no roadmap. You had to start to figure out what to do. How did you start building trust?
Well, we started by establishing what we called a mirror team. So we had people from each function of P&G and Walmart. What was the mirror? So finance to finance, logistic to logistic, IT to IT. And that group became, we were going to be the ones that co-design the relationship. We were going to be the ones that got it accepted within our respective organizations, and we would serve to be the kind of the board of directors to lead the relationship. And what we quickly found out was that we didn't really have a clue what the other one did. There was no understand. They didn't understand how a consumer products company. We didn't really understand all the stresses of of a retailer, and we operated on two different time frames. Retail is much more short-term, much more day at a time, week at a time, month at a time, quarter at a time. CPG is much longer-term focused, innovation, market research, product research, so forth. So the first meeting that we had with this mirror team, I gave everybody sticky pads, and I had two flip charts. One that here's things that you think would be exciting to work on and that we could win. And this flip chart, put the things that you think will make it not work. We took an hour, people, and when they put their stickies up, I walked back in the room. The one with it won't work was covered with yellow sticky pads. The other one had about 5 little pads on it. And I think those were people who worked with me who were just trying to suck up. So I called my wife at the end of the day and I said, don't unpack. This may be a very short assignment. But one of the things I learned is, if you're going to drive change, you have got to validate people's concerns. So by having their concerns on that, we went through each sticky pad and we either were able to answer it, we made it something we were going to investigate, so we validated everybody's concern, and the only thing that we required was, if we can convince you that we've solved it, will you take the sticky pad away and not be a loyal opposition, where you keep banging this drum and at the same time. And we use that same technique in the organization to drive out the people who were pushing back all the time and didn't want to do it. Because again, remember, P&G, every idea that we would float, the people doing the work appreciated the fact that there was a better way, but the people who were in control didn't want someone else messing with their with their control and their power structure. So we then said, okay, we're going to have to trust. What we said, one of the operating principles we were going to put down was trust. And we agreed we couldn't trust. We could only agree our intent that the other party was going to be trustworthy, because there was no trust at that period of time. And even when we would start to flow chart processes, we would say, well, wait a minute, you're doing something here and we're doing it over here. Why don't we just use one set of numbers? And they said, we don't trust your numbers. So it wasn't until we could share and start with common information, common data, that both of us would accept, that then we could make the changes that were necessary. And, you know, I always say to people, as I have helped companies do customer-supplier relationships, if you had the mindset that said, what if you owned all of your customers and all of your suppliers? What would you do differently, and where would it show up in your business? People can answer that pretty quickly as they think about it. Then I said, okay, the second question is, how can you incent either the customer or supplier to do what it is you want them to do? And that's the challenge, is how do you make it a win-win? It's not that hard, but you have to first get to reality. Most companies have their policies and stuff kind of protect them from truth. Could I tell the one story about purchase order mismatch?
Sure, that's a great story.
The Walmart team leader said, well, the first thing we need to do is the basics. We can't pay your invoices. We only can pay 50% of them without having manual intervention. I said, Brent, that's ridiculous. I have data that says we have 99% perfect orders. So I pulled out a $100 bill, slapped it on the table, said, I'll bet you $100 I'm right. He said, here's $100, I think I'm right. How are we going to prove it? I said, I will hire someone for 6 weeks, an auditing agency, to come in, and every invoice that comes in is this payable or does it need some intervention? I lost my $100 badly. So now I'm angry because I'm operating under this 99% perfect order. So I go back, and here's what we did internally to prevent us from knowing truth. If you ordered something to be delivered Friday, delivering it Friday complete was the perfect order, okay? But on Wednesday, I would call you and say, I can't deliver it Friday. Can I deliver it Monday? Well, you would say, yeah, I need the product, so go ahead, I'll take it Monday. Well, now a perfect order was delivering it Monday. Then on Friday, I would call and say, I can't do the whole thing on Monday. How about if I do half Monday and half Tuesday? Okay, I need the product. So we would change the perfect order. Now it was half Monday. So we instead of dealing with reality and accepting when we had a pain point that we owned and needed to change, but internally we were patting each other. We'd break our arms patting each other on the back for our 99% perfect orders, but that's not what our customers saw.
So in order to build that trust, you put together the mirror structure. You talked about what didn't work openly. You opened information and shared information. You also put together a structure, but at the end you worked on a joint vision.
Yes.
Despite being two companies, you worked on a joint vision for that team. How was that process?
Well, again, that's what ended up coming from that 2 days with we said, if it's going to work, here's what it's going to require, and it's got to play within both companies. So we came up with operating principles, common strategies, and we designed it together. And so that's how we were able to get started. And then we really got honest with each other as we got to understand each other, so that I could say, well, what are you doing this, and why are you doing it? And they would say the same to me. Plus, we then, for the first year and a half, anybody who joined my team worked a week in a Walmart store. And everything from night receiving, they wouldn't let us touch the cash register, but we could stand there and load the stuff in a bag Well, the cashier rang it up, which is probably smart on their part. Yeah, but so that we then had more of an understanding. We went and had people work in their warehouse to understand how they did. We took them to Cincinnati so they could see our research labs. Because if Walmart could have taken Tide and put it in a brown paper bag and saved a nickel, they would have done that. Because they didn't understand our half of the equation. But once we understood that, we could then say, when you do this, here's the pain that we receive. Or we would see the misalignment, and then we could understand what's the cost of that misalignment in time, money, frustration, emotion. And when you don't understand truth, everybody has they tell themselves a mental story. So we were believing the wrong things about each other because we didn't understand the truth. So we were looking for them to take advantage of us or vice versa, because that's where we thought was happening until, can I tell another dragon?
Let's start talking about the dragon.
Okay. The big dragon is, I call it corporate fog. And corporate fog manifests itself in two ways. The C-suite of most companies do not have a clue what it's like to be a customer or supplier of their organization. And as a matter of fact, if they had to buy from themselves, one of their first objectives would be switch suppliers. The second thing that corporate fog does is the people who are doing the work are doing this. They're saying, do you realize the pain we're suffering? Do you realize the opportunities we're missing? But the fog is so thick, nobody can see them waving their hands, so nobody asks them what's wrong. So then people say, okay, how do you get rid of the fog? Well, how does nature get rid of the fog? The sun comes out, melts away the mist, and then all of a sudden you can see clearly. It's getting to reality, getting to truth. If you can get to truth, then there's many options of how to fix it. And so that was one of the first things we had to kill was that corporate, get rid of the corporate fog and get to reality.
And just to give you some perspective of the results of this joint collaboration and changing the way things work between P&G and Walmart, when Tom and his team started working, the joint, or P&G's business with Walmart was $350 million per year. 18 years later, after they implemented, replicated, and made sure this was the new way of working, the business went up to
$8 billion.
$8 billion.
And it's 15 years, don't it? Not
15
18.
years. 15 years after.
And
so
Walmart
the dimensions
was
of the
losing,
change was impactful.
Walmart was losing $17 million on that $350 million because they had this new theory of everyday low price, and the people that would run the high-low promotions for a week, they would lower their price to meet that. So that meant frequently they were selling below cost on the P&G items. And over that 15 years, we improved the margin from -5 to +12. That was enough to be, on that $8 billion, that's a $1.2 billion profit swing. And it wasn't one magic thing, it was one little thing after another after another. It's so beautiful to see that happen. And once there wasn't anything in that 15 years that we decided to tackle that we didn't be able to find a way to make it work. It was just absolutely amazing. If your attitude is right and you have the support and you're able to test and challenge things, it's incredible. You can, and I've seen this, I've consulted with companies all around the world, big ones, little ones, different industries. Anybody who decides they want to take collaboration with customers and suppliers seriously, it always works better than the old system. Now, it won't stay there if you don't maintain it. Because I have seen companies where we've made radical improvements. They get a new CEO and says, that's not my strategy. And so they start defunding or cutting this, and it slides back. But the commitment with P&G and Walmart, it's been going on now for 35 years. These companies don't do this for 35 years if it's not working. And P&G, we've just appointed our 4th team leader in 35 years because you build trust over time, and the more trust you have, the more risk you're willing to take. And the more risk you're willing to take, you're inventing the future together, because things are changing all the time. Walmart could see things we couldn't see. We could see things they couldn't see. But when we shared that, we had a huge advantage versus anybody else, because we knew each other. We knew each other's capabilities, and so we could tackle that.
And I'm sure in many moments in time things didn't work, and you have a phrase that is walking towards the barking dog.
Right.
How did you approach things when they were not working?
Well, we would still call them out, and we would try to get, why are they not working? And part of it is recognition and reward systems. One of the problem with recognition and reward systems, they work. You get what you recognize, you get what you reward. P&G had invented this thing called pre-built displays, where we would put these wonderful things on our products on a pallet. We'd shrink wrap it. We would ship it from our factory to their DC. It would be unloaded by a forklift. It would go right straight into a truck for the store, because every store had its own door. And so it didn't even get stocked in the warehouse. They'd unload it at store level. They would, in a forklift, bring it out to the selling area, put it on the floor, unwrap the shrink wrap, put a sign on it, there you go. 34 cents a case it saved in labor. Walmart didn't want to do it. Why? Because the buyer had to initiate it, and for the buyer, it was enormous amount of work. Every one of these that they bought was they had to treat it like a new item. So they had all this extra paperwork, all this clearance, all this kind of stuff. So I was frustrated. I said, this is too good to be true. I got to get away. So, you know, when they have golf tournaments or tennis tournaments, they make a check, a fake check on a big styrofoam board, right? So I had a check made up on a board like that for $1 million for Walmart. And this was the day before tight security. I was able to have easy access into Walmart's executive row. So I had my little $1 million check. I stood outside the break room. Their CFO came out and said, Tom, what are you doing here? I said, Paul, I have $1 million check for Walmart, and I can't get anybody to take it. He said, come in my office. You found somebody. So he walked in, and he knew I was a bit of a joker. So he said, okay, now what? All right, tell me what the story is. I explained it to him, and as soon as I got finished explaining, he said, I can fix that. I said, well, how? You tell me how much we're saving. I will put half of that amount in the buyer's account, and the other half will just be savings in the warehouse, in the store. We don't need to micromanage that. We know it's good for the company. Well, that went from people not wanting to do it to if they want to do it in every one of our brands. Well, do you think that helped P&G? Yes, it did. We had all these displays in stores. Our market share rocketed. The buyers were happy. But it's removing, when you're working on this, think about it, it's like having a rope with lots of knots in it, and you go and you untie this knot, then you go to the next knot, and you untie that knot. And so it's amazing. Another example that we had, Walmart was so big that when they placed a big order, we may had to plan for 3 months to make the product to support what they called a tab when they would advertise something. Well, P&G had a policy. We could go up on our price any point in time, and when we did, we would give a retailer a chance to buy 2 weeks' business. Well, guess what? We have a price increase. They're running a major ad. It's already printed at a price based on the old price, and I'm supposed to go in and tell them, you're going to have to, I'm sorry, you're going to either have to change your ad, right, or you're going to lose money. And I refused to do it. I went back and argued. I said, I'm going to dive in a grenade on this. This is just not fair. It's not right. And I got it changed. And that's how you build trust, is when you're obviously doing something wrong and you're willing to own up to, I own that, and I got to get it fixed. And with our teams, we had two principles that we would work on issues, not positions. Because I could say, here's my policy, and they would say, well, here's my policy. Okay, what do you have? Let's have a policy fight. It's like arm wrestling. Instead, we said, what's the purpose of the policy? And then we would take the issue, and most of the time, it was a combination of, we take something from Walmart, something from P&G, and we invented a third way of doing things. And we found over and over again that, and then the second principle was, it's more important what's right than who's right. So you have to be humble, willing to listen, willing to consider, deal with reality, and then there's almost nothing that's not fixable. And then the last thing I would say that is so important is recording history. Every year, we would do an annual report that both of us would own. Here's what we accomplished this year. Because once you record history, it's history. And you're always having to get new people on board. And if you don't have history, 5 years after you've started, someone says, well, yeah, that's a bunch of hokey pokey. I don't really believe that will work. We could say, well, here's 10 years worth of annual reports. Where do you want to start arguing? And here are the people that worked on the business in both companies that are saying, this is what really happened. Well, then, so that's really important. But if you don't record history, there's no way to build on it because you got people changing. Another misalignment was, there was one time I had an agreement that someone at Walmart said, if you do this, we'll do that. So I went and got that agreed. Meanwhile, that person got moved to another department. The new person came in and said, I didn't agree to that. I said, wait a minute. So I went to the CEO of Walmart and I said, wait a minute, this is timeout, unfair, throwing the flag. You expect me to speak for P&G, and I'm supposed to stand, when I speak, P&G stands behind that. You need to have your people be willing to do the same thing. If they speak for Walmart, and he fixed it just like that. But see, we were dealing with principles, and we had enough history of success that we could try things. And many big ideas are risky. Okay, when you're changing from what was success to something else. So we learned how to do testing. Testing was very powerful because we could take an idea and we could de-risk it. So we would start out by saying, if this were to work, what's the size of the prize? What do we estimate it will cost to do it? What do we think the ROI will be? What are the things that are going to have to change in order to make us do that? And then, very important, what is the success criteria that has to be met for us to expand it? That's a very important step because for two reasons. One, you fall in love with your own ideas. And so if you don't have a success criteria, it's real easy for you to, well, it didn't work right, but let's still do it. And the other thing is, I call it the moving goalpost. We agreed to 5-to-1 payout was good enough. And we'll go to expand it, and someone from one of the companies said, I think it really needs to be 7-to-1 for me to be able to, no, that's not what we agreed. Now, I'll work with you all day long how to take it from 5 to 7. But then what was really magic about that is once we would be successful, we developed a principle which we called search and reapply. So if it worked in one category or one department, we would say what other department or whether for Walmart or what other category would work, would it work in? Or when we were global, international, we could test something in Canada, it worked, expand it in Mexico, and our competition never saw it coming in Mexico. But we knew exactly the investment it was going to take, the payout. It was brilliant. It was like we were playing chess and they were playing checkers from our competitors' point of view.
Tom, final question before I open it to the audience. So someone might read the book, someone might hear you say, okay, you went from $350 million to $8 billion per year, but this was 30-something years ago. This is the way things work today. So what's new here? Thank you for sharing the story, but is this still relevant? That's the way we work today. Why is this story still relevant? What makes it relevant today?
Well, it's relevant today because it works, and the future is always changing. Every function is constantly evolving. The market, the economy, the consumer, and what we were doing was inventing the future together. And yeah, the things you would work on in 1994 are not the same things that you'd work on today. I mean, today they're talking about things like AI. They're talking digital advertising. We didn't even know what a digital advertiser, was. And the interesting thing is, it is more and more, there's opportunities to share data, and every time you share putting their data and our data together, then that opens up new opportunities that each one of us would have seen part of it, but not seen the whole part. And then once you can only do a strategic relationship with maybe 4 or 5 of your suppliers or customers, but what you learn from there that you can then reapply to the next level of companies you're dealing business in a value-added, we call strategic relationships, value-added relationships, and even then transactional. But by the time you get to transactional, yes, we've automated some things, but it's making these people that are transactional much more effective and much more efficient. So they still benefit, and in Walmart's case or P&G's case, they were important. They may be small, but like, take Red Bull. When it first came out, a lot of people didn't, what do you mean? Caffeine and a cold depth. But they may not have been a big brand, but they were important as innovation, and they maybe were a bigger chunk of the potential for new business. And so, it really is relevant all around. And what this did is it revolutionized internally both P&G and Walmart. P&G, we found so much benefit working with Walmart that now we have supplier business development. And we're doing the same thing with our suppliers. And I helped to get that started before I left. And Walmart took that same philosophy, and they've worked with their technology vendors, suppliers. And so they're on the leading edge of that. And the people are developing things that they know they'll have a market for. So it's totally relevant. And there is a cost to misalignment, and there is a value. If you can make 2 and 2 5, that's good. And if you don't deal with it, 2 and 2 becomes 3.
And you were the first one to make that trip from Cincinnati to Bentonville. But if you go to Bentonville right now, how many? Hundreds of suppliers?
There's 2,000 teams in Northwest Arkansas working with Walmart. Now they're not all. I mean, they have elements of the P&G Walmart relationship in terms of they're all have some element of multifunctional, but and it's not only there, but it's with Target, with Costco, with Kroger. I mean, it's now the way the industry operates, and the same thing is it's been that model has been moved from retail and CPG to ingredient suppliers, to packaging suppliers, because it works.
Okay, so now we have the opportunity to ask some questions from the audience. ¿Quién tiene el micrófono? Micrófono. Any questions? I have many questions, but ¿alguien? ¿Nadie? ¿Quién?
Thank you very much. And a question for Tom. What will be your advice for a small provider, a small company who does not have the same negotiation power, the same muscle as P&G to get the attention for their retailers?
Well, first of all, every company has something they do really well. And if they can identify what they do really well, then they figure out, how do I bring that and make a value to it? And something that I always recommend is if you can get your company to be thinking about everyone in the company, how do you commercialize your whole company so that everybody understands what they do and how that contributes to the success of your company. Walmart was brilliant at that. They were so focused on everyday low price. Absolutely every person in the company had a P&L, even if it was just your phone call, but they understood that everything they made that would reduce the price or reduce cost allowed them to sell something cheaper. And it was brilliant. You walk into a Walmart, as an example, and in front of every Xerox machine was a pallet of shredded paper that said, do you really need to make that many copies? And so they reinforced it. But again, an example, I worked with a small company in Switzerland that sold ingredients, vitamins. And they said, well, we're a small, we sell to all the big drug companies, but we're just a small company. I said, well, what do you do really well? Well, we really understand what nutrients you need at every age group and if you're pregnant or if you're a runner or what, we can tell you need different. I said, well, wait a minute. There's one-a-day vitamin. Maybe could you have formulas for men and women? Could you have formulas for old seniors? They said, oh, sure. I said, well, why don't we go to one a day and you can show them well, what do you have today? You have one a day for seniors, one for active, whatever, and they sell the ingredients. They're kind of intel inside. So I said, reframe yourself. You are the intel inside of a billion-dollar brand. Yes, you're not a dominant player in market share or in dollars. So it's reframing what you do to make it relevant, and what problems can you solve. And by the way, also if I was a smaller retailer, I would go to Walmart and I would say, what do I need to do to be a better fit so that I don't have to spend time doing all the things to get ready. We can spend our time talking about how to create value together. So that's the way.
Hay una pregunta acá. Directly from Walmart.
Hi, Tom. Patricia from Walmart. So what advice would you give us and the audience here on terms of trust? So why or how should we build trust nowadays? And why are you choosing that answer?
Well, trust involves vulnerability. So at some point in time, you need to trust my competence, you need to trust my intent, and I'm willing to be accountable. So you're saying, okay, here's the scenario, I'll do this, you'll do that, then you evaluate it, and so you're building. Trust, as Reagan said, trust and verify. Yes, you have an intent to trust, and again, what I ended up having to do, and so did the Walmart folks, many times we had to go back and challenge our company because we made a commitment and someone else somewhere away did something that caused that not to happen. Well, here's a great example. When in Walmart for Christmas, we would bundle certain things in cosmetics and whatever as a seasonal gift, okay? So we take these and we bundle them, and Walmart would pre-order, they'd order it in June. Okay, well, as we got into November, they call me on the phone, they say, hey, Tom, these aren't selling as well as we thought. If there's still a way to not fulfill the whole order, can you stop it? However, if you can't, we ordered it, we'll take it. And if they had to do that, they would debundle it and sell it individually or whatever, or mark it down or whatever. But that's the kind of thing, when you do something that you're fulfilling that trust. And typically it happens where you stand behind something if you make a mistake. I remember I had one of my people gave the bad number quote to a Walmart person, and they sold product at a price, and I had to go back to the company and get us to stand by making sure that they were made whole. But you learn from those things, and then you build in ways so that you're not, not doing it the next time.
So we're going to have some time afterwards to ask Tom more questions in the cocktail outside. I'm going to finish with a question, Tom, that has to do with you as a person. You definitely had to build a culture for this to work. And in your book, you talk about servant leadership.
Yes.
And the time we've spent together, I think that describes who you are very well. Why was this important within the team and within the culture?
Well,
the servant leadership concept.
Yeah, servant leadership is turning the traditional model of hierarchy upside down. So my role, typically the head of an organization is the biggest office. They have this many parking place, but we flipped that upside down. My role was to support the people who were doing the work and helping to remove roadblocks from them. And by doing that, we were able to get a lot more empowerment, and a lot more ideas were being worked simultaneously. So instead of going up the pyramid and working on 3 ideas, we had 10 people working on ideas. And even if 4 of them failed, we still had 6 ideas we could go to market. And when we built our offices, I had all the offices the same size, because that's what Walmart did. And your hierarchy wasn't, at P&G, every time you got promoted, you got a bigger office, okay? And we learned that from Walmart. I have a corner office. No. All our corner offices were conference rooms. And we learned how to be much more transparent with information. We learned that from Walmart. I remember Sam Walton saying, someone saying to him, "You share so much data with your people. Aren't you afraid that it's going to get out to your competitors?" He said, "I'd rather take that chance than not give information to my people to be able to make the right decisions and drive the business and better satisfy customers." So we adopted, and then they adopted things that we did that were different. But I had every office had a whiteboard in it, and I would say to people, "I want you to put the top 2 or 3 things, your breakthroughs you're trying to get, and I want you to do them as if you're doing an outline in college. Big A, big B, and then start filling in as you go along." And I would go from office to office over, not every day, but over a period of time. Tell me what you're working on, and tell me, so we'd have the discussion, and I'd say, "What does help look like?" Most people knew where they were stuck, but they didn't know what the options were, or they didn't think anybody would care to give them what they thought they needed. They didn't know how to ask for it. I found out that 80% or 85% of what was blocking people, I had the authority or the money to be able to do something to help make that. Well, once that got out, then that people were willing to work harder, try out new ideas. Here's a classic example. P&G, very hierarchical. We had new computers that came out. I got the first super deluxe 10 times faster computer, okay? So I'm walking around and I go into the office of one of my analysts. And I said, "What are you working on?" He said, "I'm doing shelf planograms for all different regions of the country, different size stores, different market conditions, different ethnic." I said, "Well, boy, that sounds like," yeah, he said, "Here's the benefit when we get this done. We'll have this kind of distribution. We'll have the right product." I said, "Well, what does help look like?" He said, "If I had a faster computer." I said, "Well, wait a minute. What do you mean?" And he would go, "Toot, toot, 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 toot." And then we would talk for a while, and the computer's going over here. Then he'd go, "Toot, toot, toot, toot," and we're talking. I said, "Jesse, I think I'm going to make your day. If you can make your computer do my email, you can have my super deluxe computer." And we went into my office, and he made his computer do my email. I never did a spreadsheet in my life, and it's not on my bucket list. And of course, the word spread wildly in the organization. And that opened up people, again, to make requests. And then we had the same issue with Walmart, where we would say, what's keeping us from trying that? Well, I've got to convince this person, or I don't have the time. Okay, how about if we provide someone to work it with you and you instruct them? Because Walmart, the reason we were a dedicated team, the Walmart folks all had their regular job, and this was on top of their regular job, which that was pretty much Sam Walton. He was the one, I think, that invented you can milk cows twice a day. These people really worked hard. And then we would try to, one other example that I'll tell you was on cosmetics. Walmart had health and beauty aids was a department manager, and that was toothpaste, shampoo, all of these things, but it also included cosmetics, and P&G had CoverGirl and Max Factor, okay? Well, it was all, well, you women know this, all these little fiddly different sizes and different colors and whatever. Well, that was the last thing that department manager worked on was cosmetics. So if you wanted eyeshadow at Walmart and you wanted blue, they had it. But there were so many out of stocks. They always had old product. They were advertising new things on TV, which never got in there. And Walmart made a lot of money in cosmetics. P&G made a lot of money for cosmetics, and Walmart's everyday low price would have substantially lowered that for women looking for cosmetics, okay, versus what was out there. So I went into a guy by the name of Bill Fields. He was the president of the Walmart stores. I said, Bill, I got a great idea. He said, what is it? Let's make a department manager just for cosmetics. He said, wait a minute, Tom, do you think money grows on trees? I said, not normally, but in this case I do. I tell you what, I'm willing to test with you. I will pay for 6 months for 3 stores to create a cosmetics department with its own department manager, and we'll do a match panel. We'll have those 3 stores and 5 or 6 control stores for each one of them. And we'll see whether it pays out. It blew the roof off, and in 6 months, he was able to take that to his team and get credit for it, which was fine with me. Thank you very much. And they expanded that and created a whole new department. There was Department 2 was health and beauty aids, and they created Department 46, which was, and it, I think it cost me $20,000 or something. It was. But sometimes you have to do something to prime the pump to prove that something will work. And so one of the things that I did, I convinced the company I needed a discretionary budget. I needed to have something I could say, I couldn't put it in price. There was no way I couldn't, because we had the same ability for all suppliers or all customers to buy at a price. But I could use it to invest in extra resources or to do something different. And as an example, P&G and Walmart were the first ones to work together with the MIT lab on RFID technology. And so the two of us have benefited enormously by growing together and doing that. And I paid for, it was very expensive to be part of that consortium. And I paid for Walmart the first year, so they were the only retailer involved. And I said, if at the end of the year, if it's not worthwhile, then you can drop out. It won't cost you anything other than your time. And obviously it turned out enormously successful, and Walmart uses RFID at lots of places.
And we could continue listening to Tom for the next 2 or 3 hours, because the stories and the work has been amazing. Again, I encourage you to read the book. The story is incredible. And in this book, John Pepper, which is a very well-known CEO of P&G, talks about Tom's work as a revolution in retailing. And I want to thank Tom for joining us from Bentonville. It's been an honor. For Grupo Hola, it's been an honor for Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez and for Latin Consumer Summit to have you on our stage. You're a living legend in retail, and you really changed our industries for the best. We talked during this hour, or you talked during this hour, about shared values, trust, hard work, collaboration, honesty, candor, and respect. And we talked about retail and brands, but if we put these concepts and embrace them as a world, I'm sure we would have a much better world. So Tom, thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank
My
you for your
pleasure.
time.
Thank you.